Hello, I'm Sharon Longo, the editor of Autism Parenting Magazine. Welcome to our 2024 summit with our presentation called Great Minds Are Not All the Same. We're so glad you could join us. Today we have Temple Grandin, the prominent author and speaker who has appeared on TV shows such as 2020 and Primetime. Her books include Thinking in Pictures, Livestock Handling and Transport, The Autistic Brain, as well as Animals in Translation and Visual Thinking, both which have been on the New York Times bestseller list. Temple earned the title Distinguished Professor of Animal Science at Colorado State University in 2022. The facilities she designed for handling livestock are used by companies around the world, and she has been instrumental in animal welfare, auditing programs used by McDonald's, Wendy's, Whole Foods, and other corporations. Temple was inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame in September 2017 and was inducted into the Colorado Authors Hall of Fame in 2023. Welcome, Temple.
Hi, I'm Temple Grandin. I am professor of animal science at Colorado State University. And when I was a little kid, I had very severe symptoms of autism, no speech until age 4. I want to really emphasize the importance of early intervention, early education. You have a young child that's not talking, you need to do something about it right away. And that takes a good teacher and many hours. And I have found that some teachers have the natural ability to work with these kids, how to get them engaged, starting with little turn-taking games. In my program at age 3, the major emphasis was on speech. People had to slow down when they talked to me, because when they talked fast, it went to gibberish. Also, you got to give the kid time to respond. They're like a phone with a poor service. Another big emphasis was how to take turns at games, learning how to wait and take turns at all kinds of little children's games. And then finally, skills, things like learning to eat with utensils, things like brushing their hair, putting on clothes, just skills. Some programs, I think, have too much emphasis on eye contact. That was not emphasized at all. But since I was a child of the 50s, social skills were taught. If I forgot to say please, mother would cue me and say, you forgot to say please. Now I'm going to start talking about different ways that people think. This is my book, Visual Thinking, and I'm an extreme visual thinker. And we need to take the things that an autistic person is good at, or an autistic child is good at, and see what they gravitate towards. What I'm going to talk about in this talk now is how we need the skills of people who think differently. You know, I tell business people, if you want the waterworks to run and maybe the power to stay on, you're going to need some of these autistic minds. Now, my next slide just shows that the first step is just realizing that people think differently. I didn't know that other people thought in words until I was in my 30s. I was really shocked when I learned this, that other people thought in words, to see what the animals were seeing. And I didn't know at that time that other people thought in words. So they thought it was kind of crazy to look at what cattle were seeing. Where being a visual thinker, it was obvious to me to look at what the animals were seeing. And the next slide I actually took in the UK, and it shows a reflection on a handling facility. Now, this reflection might be here at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and then gone at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And the animals will refuse to walk over that reflection. I noticed these little things. And if you can take these distractions out of the facility, it's going to really make a big difference on the handling of the animals. Animals notice little details people don't notice. Now, my next slide shows a launch pad. I visited Cape Kennedy about 6 years ago, and I had a wonderful time watching a SpaceX launch and visiting this launch pad. They were just finishing up the construction on it, and I saw something in there that would be a risk. There was a raccoon living in it, and he's on the next slide. And they didn't know that a raccoon was living in the launch pad. And they were building fueling equipment in the basement of that launch pad, and I saw lots of things with wires that you wouldn't want to have a raccoon chewing. That's an example of seeing something that might be a risk. So the next slide talks about different approaches to risk. An object visualizer visualizes the raccoon chewing the wires. The mathematician will calculate what's the probability that something like that might happen. The verbal thinkers discuss it. Now, it really made my day when I discovered scientifically that there's 3 different kinds of thinking. That's on the next slide. And I am an object visualizer. There's a slide showing the things that the object visualizer is good at. That's on the next slide. Object visualizers think in photorealistic pictures. Now, the kind of careers that my kind of mind is good at is inventing mechanical equipment. I worked with a lot of people when I was out working on cattle handling facilities that were autistic, undiagnosed, and they had multiple patents. They owned metalworking shops, and they were inventing equipment. Now, a lot of those people have retired out now, and the thing is, they're not getting placed. They're not getting replaced. They're in special ed, playing video games or whatever. And you want to get somebody off the video games? Why don't you try auto mechanics, fixing cars? That has been successful, and they find that motors are more interesting. Other things that object visualizers are good at are graphic design. I'm concerned about artificial intelligence replacing some of those jobs, photography, working with animals, and highly skilled trades. One of the things that artificial intelligence is not going to replace is the hands-on jobs. I don't think AI is going to go in and fix an elevator anytime soon. Let's go to the next slide. Now, this is some welding that a young adult in a trade school class called TACT, Training Autistic Community Trades in Denver, and he just saw how he could make flowers out of just random parts. That's an example of real creativity. This is the kind of person that can fix anything, the kind of person that a factory needs to fix their equipment. And I worked with a lot of different meat companies, and they had that kind of weird guy in the shop that could fix anything. He was the autistic guy. And the thing is, they're not getting replaced. We've got a huge shortage of them. And let's go to the next slide. This is going to be the mathematician. This is a spatial visualizer. And the spatial visualizer thinks in patterns. I think in photographs. I have to make a graphics file to remember something. The spatial visualizer thinks in patterns. So they're going to be super good at higher math. Where I was terrible in higher math, I couldn't do algebra because I can't visualize it. I'm very concerned about algebra requirements screening kids like me out. But on the other hand, if the kid is a spatial visualizer, he might need an algebra book when he's in primary school. You see, this is where one kid, you want to give him the algebra book, let him move ahead in math. And I'm the one that needs to take business math so I can run my shop finances. You see, different people are different. So the spatial visualizer, computer programming, engineering, the mathematical parts of engineering, chemistry, physics, music and math go together. Music and math go together, and art and mechanics go together. Let's go to the next slide. The verbal thinker, well, writer, sales, banking. Now, some autistics are verbal thinkers, and these are the ones that love history. They love facts. They'll have everything memorized about football players. And some of the jobs that they can be really, really super good at is specialized retail. Banks have hired them to sell fancy financial products I don't understand because they have knowledge of all the products. They're good at things like selling cars, selling auto parts, memorizing every part number in the warehouse, knowing all of the things that are available, helping a customer pick out the right product for them. Let's say it's phones. Don't try to sell them the most expensive phone. Sell them the right phone for them. I'm putting a lot of emphasis on career because what has made my life worthwhile is having an interesting career. And I have friends through career. I like to talk about shared interests. I was on a flight one time and I discussed with a lady construction manager, concrete forming systems. That was a really, really great flight. Super interesting conversation. And then 2 computer programmers got married, and their first romantic date, they had a 4-hour discussion on computer data storage systems because that's just so interesting. Let's go to the next slide. Now, there's research that shows that different kinds of thinking exist, and I review the research in my book, Visual Thinking, and where the research really shows it is the difference between the object visualizer that thinks in pictures and the spatial visualizer who thinks in patterns. And they're actually kind of opposite traits. Now, the difference between the autistic person and the regular person is a regular person will get to be a lot more mixtures. But in autism, you may have an extreme object visualizer like me, or an extreme mathematician. And they're running all the tech companies right now. And the next slide just states that some people are mixtures of the different kinds of thinking. Now, the next slide shows some of my brain scans that shows that I have a huge visual thinking circuit in my brain. That was a real wow when I saw that. We can go and look at another picture of the big visual thinking circuit. Here's another slide of it. You can see a great big one going all the way from the frontal cortex all the way back to primary visual cortex. Now I want to look at some of the research that's been done on different kinds of thinking. The next slide shows an eye gaze study. Okay, let's say, how do I take in information? I'd rather look at pictures. Let's say I want to learn how a water pump works. I'd rather see it or take it apart or look at pictures. The verbal thinker wants to read it. The mathematician wants to read about it, but also look at the pictures too. Another study, a very interesting study on creating a planet. And that's the next slide. And they had art students, high school art students, high school science students, and humanities students. Those would be the word thinkers. And make up a planet, teams of students. So the art students come up with fantastic things, crystals and polar bears and palm trees and all kinds of stuff. The science students draw a boring circle, tell you about the atmosphere and the gravity. And the humanities students did splotches. But you know what shocked me about the verbal students? No planning. No planning. One of the problems with verbal thinking is a lot of top-down, oh, we need to have an inclusive classroom. Well, how do you do it? Well, I can tell you 3 things you would need to do in an inclusive classroom. You need to get rid of the LED lights that flicker. And one of the ways to get rid of them is to take out the phone, take this thing out right here, and to photograph the room in slow motion video. You'll find them. The other thing is I have no working memory. So any task that involves a sequence, checklist format, use checklist formats for tasks that involve sequences or the list of things you have to do, similar to Pilot's checklist. And then the third thing is getting rid of bullies. So those are 3 things you could do to make a classroom more inclusive. And those are specific things. See, I'm not just talking generalities about an inclusive classroom. So the fact that this study showed that verbal thinkers lacked planning, I think that's an issue. So here we're going to need both kinds of thinkers. Let's go to the next slide. Verbal thinkers tend to overgeneralize, top-down, big concepts, leave out the details. The object visualizers and the mathematicians, they're bottom-up thinkers, tend to keep a whole lot of details. In fact, ChatGPT and other artificial intelligence systems are also bottom-up thinkers. They're only as good as their data set. If you feed them rubbish, and they will put lots of rubbish out, I can assure you of that. They need to be fed good data. And artificial intelligence is doing amazing things in chemistry right now, discovering new chemical compounds, discovering new antibiotics. It's just amazing what it's doing in the chemistry and the material science field. But they're given very, very, very good databases. It's not looking off of blog posts and stuff like that and social media. Let's go on to the next slide. Now, the original inventors, when the patent office first started, both in Europe and in the US, were all object visualizers, designing mechanical things, like a blacksmith that designed a grain harvester. Bicycle mechanics designed an airplane, the Wright brothers. So the next slide says, today we don't make it anymore. And I'm very concerned, especially in the US, that there's a lot of equipment right now we have to import from Europe, and we're not making it in the US. And the reason for that is a difference in the educational system. In 9th grade or around 14 years of age, you can either go university route or you can go tech route. Now, we tend to look at the tech route as a lesser form of intelligence. But I spent 25 years working in heavy construction, and the people I worked with that had shops, they were inventing all kinds of things. It's a different form of intelligence. And what I have found is that the verbal thinkers don't understand it. I gave a talk one time at a school, and I had to explain to this teacher who understood verbal thinking and mathematical thinking that how picture thinking worked. They didn't know that it existed. The next slide shows a big 3D printer made in Europe. And then Next slide shows the inside of the state-of-the-art electronic chip making machine. It's from Holland. It's made in Holland. Actually, it's based on research done in the US, mathematical research in the US, but it's made in Holland because they value their tech people. The next slide shows what this looks like when you take all the white metal panels off that make it just look like a square box. Inside that thing, there's all kinds of mechanical things for my kind of mind to work on. And I looked up some of the stuff on their website, little tiny tools, adjusting all kinds of stuff. Yep, they're going to need the non-mathematical mind too. The next slide shows a Zeiss electron microscope from Germany, and the Zeiss company is making the mirrors for the electronic chip making machine. And the next slide shows a pork plant in the US, and just about all of that equipment is imported. A lot of it comes from Holland. If we want to build a poultry processing plant in the US right now, we have to import 100 shipping containers from Holland. So there's some things here you're doing right in your educational system, because in Europe, you're giving an option for my kind of mind that is not able to do the higher math. And the equipment that comes out of Europe is very, very good equipment. Lots of food processing equipment from Italy. And you might wonder in autism talk, why am I discussing this stuff? Because these things are jobs, and really good jobs. And what's happening to a lot of our object visualizers is they're getting addicted to video games. They're not going into designing them. And I'm very concerned that video game design and a lot of animation jobs, AI is going to take those over. So that's why I'm pushing the physical trades for my kind of mind, because those jobs are not going to go away. The next slide shows the parachute that landed on Mars. And that fabric was woven in the UK on high-tech European looms. Go to the next slide, the Steve Jobs Theater, structural glass walls that came from Italy and Germany, and a carbon fiber roof that came from Dubai. And I'm showing these slides all the time to US educators, because we made a big mistake in taking out too many of the hands-on classes. The next slide shows paying the price for taking out things like sewing class, cooking class, woodworking, metalworking. We took a lot of these classes out, and now we're putting them back in some schools, but then they'll say, well, if you're autistic in special ed, you can't take the welding class. Well, I'm sorry, in my generation, the special ed kids owned the shops, owned them, and produced devices, patented devices that the beef industry is still using today. Now, we made some big mistakes shutting down in-house engineering departments and things like that. Big, big mistakes. Theater also is a good thing because live concerts and live theater is not going to go away. Back when record players and radio was invented, everybody predicted that concerts would go away. That did not happen. Theater did not go away. People still like theater. People still like seeing in-person things. Let's go to the next slide. Now, this is a really great auto shop in Denver where they take young autistic adults and they teach them auto mechanics. And they have a 2-week exploration camp where they can try on different trades ranging from cybersecurity. That is not going to go away. I guarantee you of that. We're going to need cybersecurity, woodworking and other things. And then they have small classes with 6 students, and they'll have the auto mechanic teacher, but then they have a job coach. So while they're teaching the auto mechanics, they're also teaching the job coach, and they've got to learn to be on time. They've got to learn they can't swear at work. They've got to learn, some social skills. And then they have contracts with local car dealerships, and they're placing the mechanics in local car dealerships. Then they have a job coach for another 2 months, and they have a 70 to 80% success rate. This is also similar to a project we have in the US called Search, Project Search. And they started out with long internships to train people in hospital jobs, things like setting up the instruments for operations, cleaning instruments. And autistic people are really good at this because they'll make sure those instruments are sterilized correctly. Yeah, because that's something really important. You don't want to get an infection when you have an operation because instruments weren't sterilized right. The next slide shows a Broadway show, How to Dance in Ohio. I went to the opening night with autistic actors. It played for about 2 weeks, and they did a great job. Theater, that's going to stay with us. The next slide shows a autopilot. My grandfather, MIT trained mathematical engineer, worked with an autistic man who came up with a crazy new idea for an autopilot. And they were a garage startup. They rented a loft over a place where they fixed trains. Garage startup, little tiny startup, tinkered and tinkered and tinkered until they got the autopilot to work. But then, unfortunately, it was stolen. And the stolen version was in every warplane during World War II. They needed a lawyer. That's a verbal thinker. This is where you really do need all the different kinds of minds. Let's go to the next slide. I'm worried we're screening out the object visualizers because I cannot do algebra. But on the other hand, you have a mathematics kid. He needs to be getting that algebra book. In fact, there's a push right now to allow younger grades to learn algebra. I think that's just fine. But then there's other kids like me where I need to be taking a shop class and building things and doing a lot of hands-on things, art stuff. My art ability was always encouraged, and I should be taking business math. And it's not a lesser form of intelligence. It's just a different form of intelligence. So for one child like me, an algebra book, I'm going to use that for doorstop. But maybe for another kid, it's a doorway to a great career in computer programming. This is where minds are different. Let's go to the next slide. And that's a corporate jet owned by a man who cannot do algebra. He took a single welding class, and he builds beef planes because he's visually memorized all of the equipment in the beef plant. Started out tiny welding projects, then gradually grew his business. And I got to fly in that plane. It's a super cool plane. And he earned it. And, stupid people don't end up earning their own private jet. He cannot do algebra. He's one of my kind of thinkers. Let's go to the next slide. And that is a hydraulic power pack, hydraulic unit. What that thing does is it runs all the equipment in the beef plant that runs off hydraulics rather than electricity. It's a wet environment. And if you know anything about hydraulics, that's an absolute thing of beauty. You see, this is what I call the clever engineer. You see, there's two parts of engineering. There's a clever engineer that make mechanical devices. And the degreed engineer, they're going to work on the boilers and the refrigeration in the food processing plant. We don't understand that. So you need both kinds of engineering. You need the mathematical degreed engineer, but then you need the clever engineer to come up with this beautiful hydraulic power pack. And when you make this right, it doesn't run hot, it doesn't scream like a jet engine or tear itself apart. Let's go on to the next slide. And that is the plant under construction. There's a piece of equipment that I worked on developing called the center track restrainer system for big beef plants. And the person who built the first one of these for me was definitely an undiagnosed autistic person. And they're retired now. I worked with another person, 20 patents. He's selling his stuff all around the world. Terrible student, took a welding class, started making stuff, selling it at little small trade shows, gradually build up his business. And why am I showing you all this equipment? Because what I want to show the educators out there and the parents, all this complicated stuff, this is not made by stupid people. It's a different kind of intelligence than the more mathematical type of intelligence. Let's go to the next slide. So when you're building that plant, you see you need everybody. You need the object visualizers to do the mechanical equipment, and I need the mathematicians to make sure the roof doesn't fall down, the building doesn't blow away in a storm, and boilers and refrigeration. That requires a lot of math. You see, you need both kinds of minds to build that big food processing plant. Now let's look at the next slide, how I collaborated on my book, Visual Thinking. I wrote the rough drafts, not very well organized. Associative kind of thinking, totally associative kind of thinking. And then Betsy, my verbal co-writer, she straightened the ball out. So that is the visual thinker working in collaboration with verbal thinker in a complementary manner. You see also at the food processing plant has to have boilers and refrigeration because you got to keep food chilled no matter in most food processing plants. You see, you need both kinds of minds. Let's go to the next slide. Let's look at making a building. The architects make a building look really nice and pretty, and the engineers are going to make sure it doesn't fall down. And if the engineers design the building, they'll just make an ugly concrete box. but it is going to withstand, it's going to be very strong. Won't be pretty, but it will be safe. Let's go to the next slide. 20% of the people I worked with, and I have worked for every major meat company. I worked in construction for 25 years. And I worked with people that were either autistic, dyslexic, or ADHD, owning big metalworking shops, inventing equipment. And most of them couldn't do algebra. This is what I call the clever engineering department. And this is where my kind of mind goes. And then your more mathematical mind needs to take algebra and other higher math to help them with programming. Okay, what makes ChatGPT work? That was all done by the programmers. In fact, ChatGPT was in the original programming was invented by a single graduate student who bought 2 video game circuit board cards from Amazon, did the original programming that AI is based on. I think that's pretty cool. Little guys innovate. It's the other thing. Let's go to the next slide. Grandparents come up to me all the time, and they discover they're autistic when the kids get diagnosed. This happens all the time. So why has granddaddy or grandmother got a job and Junior doesn't? Well, because grandfather at age 11 had a paper route. Okay, now we don't have paper routes anymore, and that's when kids would go around and deliver newspapers to homes. That's gone away now. But what we need to be doing is finding substitutes for this, like walking the dogs for the next door neighbors. It's really important for that kid to learn how to do a job on a schedule outside the home. That's really important. Where mom and dad are not the boss. It's the next door neighbor's dog. Or maybe they do a volunteer job in a church. Or they do a volunteer job just in the neighborhood. Because where we're really falling down is we're not making the transform going on into work. We're not stepping into the world of work. That is the problem. We're doing a much better job on the little kids, at least in the US, but learning how to work is a real problem. Now, where the diagnosis later in life was helpful was with relationships. That's where it was helpful. That gave them insight. But I'm seeing too many parents overprotect their kids. Their kids are not learning basic skills like shopping, just basic life skills, ordering food in restaurants. Everything's getting done for them. Now, the thing I want to ask is what would happen to some of our great thinkers and innovators in the past if they were in today's educational system? And go on to the next slide. Would they be less successful today? Let's look at Michelangelo on the next slide. Michelangelo was a problem. He had dropped out of school at age 12, grubby little naughty 12-year-old. He didn't want to learn Latin and become a lawyer. Ugh. So he's running around in all the churches where they were commissioning all this great art. That's exposure. He also grew up with stone cutting tools. That's exposure. So how do you get into some really good careers? I think making David was a really good career. And all the other art that he did. You have to have exposure. He had exposure to art, and he grew up with the tools. That's exposure. Then later on, he was apprenticed into a studio to get mentoring. So you have exposure first, then mentoring. Now, for example, I had a little flute when I was a child. I could never learn how to play it. But another child's going to just take off and learn how to play that flute. And let's look at 2 other famous people that were probably on the spectrum. Steve Jobs, bullied in school. And Einstein, no speech until age 3. Where would Einstein end up today? Nonverbal kid at 3. Let's go to the next slide. Thomas Edison was probably on the spectrum. He learned how to work at an early age because he had a paper route. And he also had a mentor that taught him the telegraph. The mentoring, that's really important. Here's another famous person that's probably on the spectrum. I really admire his engineering, and what he's done with rockets and with cars is really wonderful. Well, buying social media might have been better not to have done that. That's sort of socially a lot more complicated. But his engineering is absolutely brilliant. Let's go to the next slide. A Nobel Prize winner was 50% more likely to have an arts and crafts hobby than other scientists. That's another reason for keeping creative classes in the schools. Okay, let's look at some of the things we can do working with the minds that are different on the next slide. Tips for working with minds that are different. When they go into the world of work, let's avoid the rapid multitasking jobs, like a super busy takeout window at a McDonald's. Let's just avoid those super crazy, rapid multitasking jobs. The other thing, and I mentioned this before, is giving them checklists. So let's say they're working at McDonald's and they've got to clean the ice cream machine. Here's a checklist. Take apart steps in a list, like a pilot's checklist, cleaning steps in a list, reassembly steps in a list, because I have problems remembering sequence. Long strings of yakety yak, 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 yak. I just can't remember it. The other thing we got to do with these kids is kind of stretch them, but give them choices. We also need to be limiting the video games and endless video watching, maybe an hour a day during the week. They can do 2 hours a day on the weekends. So they have some access to it. But if all you do is watch crazy cat videos for 6 hours a day, you're not going to develop. You've got to get out and do some other things. And vague instructions do not work. That does not work. Like let's say they're working in a store and just say, well, tidy up the shelves. That's not going to work. You need to say that each brand of shampoo has to line up on the shelf with its price label that's on the front of the shelf. That's being specific. Now, the next slide just asks, what's the ultimate goal of education? Where's a student 10 years after high school? I was designing some of my first very, very big design projects. And I'll show you on the next slide one of my drawings. Now, when you're weird, because interviewing is a big problem. You see, in the TACT program in Denver, they're bypassing the interviewing because they're putting the people into car dealerships that they've contracted with. But I would sell my work. I'd show off my work. I'd show people my drawings, and they'd be impressed with my drawings. I'd show off portfolios of work. Let's say the work was computer programming or programs for artificial intelligence. You can show off some of that code. The next slide shows a drawing I sent to the Cargill Corporation. I designed all the animal handling for every Cargill plant in North America. So how did I get that job? Well, back in the late 80s, I sent this drawing and a bunch of pictures to the head of Cargill. Yeah, that's showing the work. And you got to show it to the right people. You don't just show it to HR. Next slide shows one of the pictures I sent to them, showing off the work. You basically want like a 30-second wow, like, wow, you did that. You're weird, but you did that. Next slide shows a replica of one of my systems that they made for the Temple Grandin HBO movie. And that movie also shows how I think visually. It shows visual thinking absolutely accurately. The next slide shows my brochure. And we can go on to the next slide, shows another picture that I sent to the Cargill Corporation. Now let's just look at some other tips. I get exercise. I do 100 sit-ups every night. This burst of hard exercise really is helpful. It's 100 sit-ups almost without stopping. That helps with sleep. The next slide shows my work experience. Now we're going to start looking at things that kids can do just in the neighborhood to get work experience. And when I was 13 years old, there was a seamstress that did dressmaking out of her home, and she would alter dresses. So my job was to take the dresses apart, and then she'd pin the hems, and then I hand sewed the hems. Now that was something that was just done in the neighborhood. When I was 15, I was cleaning horse stalls. When I was 16, I did some roofing. That's probably illegal. But then I also went out to my aunt's ranch, and there was work that I had to do, take guests on trail rides. And at 17 years of age, I did some entrepreneur stuff. I started a little sign painting business. But I have to make signs that other people want. One of the problems I see is the autistic child just wants to draw constant anime or some other thing, but that's not what the customer wants. My first customer was a hair salon. So I put a logo for a shampoo brand on it. I was a young kid. I didn't know about copyright infringement then, but I thought they'd like the shampoo lady on it, and they did. And then when I was in college, I did career relevant internships, because what you don't want is graduate from high school or graduate from college with no job experience. That's like jumping off a cliff. They call that in the US, jumping off the service cliff. And that can be a real mess because the person's not going to be able to handle the workplace. Now let's look at some other ways to get jobs on the next slide. Back doors into jobs. There's a scene in the HBO movie Temple Grandin where I go up to the editor of the farm magazine, our local farm magazine, and I get his card because I knew if I wrote for that magazine, it would really help my career. That's seeing a door of opportunity. They're everywhere and people just don't see them. And that scene in that movie is real. Let's go to the next slide. Elementary school life skills training. This is standard 50s, old-fashioned 50s upbringing. And I think we need to be doing some of these things. And these are not expensive things to do. The lowest income families can have their kids dress up in their good clothes when they're 7 or 8 years old, put on their good clothes, and be little hosts and hostesses at family parties. Greet the guests. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. Wood. That's the name of our next door neighbors. And we weren't allowed to call them by their first name, so we had to call them by the proper formal names. But that got us talking with other adults, selling candy for charity. You got to go up and talk to people. When I was 7 and 8, I had a little allowance, and I shopped for myself for things like candy, comics, and little airplanes and kites. And I knew exactly what the money could buy. In the 50s, 50 cents bought a lot. But if I wanted a 69-cent airplane, I had to save for 2 weeks. I was learning saving. Really, really important to be learning these things. The next slide shows friends who shared interest. A lot of autistic kids have a real problem because they don't have enough friends. But where I got friends was riding horses, friends who riding horses. My science teacher had a model rocket club, and I had friends who model rockets. Okay, today it might be a computer programming club. It might be a robotics club. Several kids have had a great time in the high school band. Friends through shared interests. Really, really, really important. And the next slide shows a shed that I made nice. Now, the thing is, I had to decorate the shed the way other people would like it, not put flying saucers on it. Don't think that's what they would have liked. You see, learning how to do work that other people are going to want. I was in high school when I did this. The next slide shows painting a sign for the Arizona State Fair Carnival back in the early 70s. That's me up there. This silly exhibit, the Himalayan monster. It was a frozen wax dummy and freezer chest full of ice. So I made a sign for it. So how did I get that job? I showed off a portfolio of my signs, and I got put to work by a sign painter. The next slide shows my sign painting truck, and I'm driving, learning driving. It is going to take longer. And if I hadn't learned to drive, I would not have had a career in the cattle industry. It's that simple. Simply would not have happened because you have to drive to all the cattle feed yards where I went. And it's going to take longer. And what you have to do is do much more practice in a totally safe place, like great big gigantic parking lot, or maybe an open field. You know, like go to the football stadium Sunday morning at 7 o'clock in the morning, nobody's there. And you've got to learn how to operate the vehicle before you go into traffic. This solves the multitasking problem. And a lot of parents are afraid to start that. And I say an open parking lot, let's find one with no light poles, absolutely nothing to hit in it. Next slide shows a slow transition to work. And let's start off with things like walking the neighbor's dog, a volunteer job at a church, something where the boss is not mom and dad. The boss might be a next door neighbor, somebody you know, but it's a boss that's outside the family. The paper routes, that's all gone now. We have to find substitutes for that. Learning skills like shopping. I'm appalled at the number of fully verbal autistic teenagers who have never gone in a store and shopped by themselves. They haven't ordered food by themselves. And they need to learn how to keep a real job before they graduate from high school. Yeah, we need to just make this happen. The next slide shows Jim, the contractor. He was an important mentor. He was starting a small steel and concrete business, and he seeked me out to design projects. He showed me how to get a business started. Mentors, really important. And the next slide just shows about mentors. My mother taught me to read when I was 8. She had a very good sense of how much to push me without forcing me into sensory overload. I had great elementary school teachers or primary school teachers. Then I had Mr. Carlock, my science teacher. He got me motivated to study. I still couldn't do algebra. So that's why I didn't major in engineering. I majored in psychology, and I could dodge a whole lot of algebra classes and a lot of math classes. But he got me motivated to study because now studying was a pathway to a goal, and bad grades in things like English was just goofing off. And now I want to talk about sensory issues. Sensory issues are real. They're on the next slide, and they're highly variable. So one person may have problems with sound sensitivity. You know, it's a way to may help that. Give the child or the young adult control of the device. So they hate the vacuum cleaner, they need to turn it on and off themselves. I've seen kids get to love vacuum cleaners when they control it. Or let's say there's too much noise in the shop for some individuals. Well, they need to go down in the shop when nobody's around and take the electric drill and turn it on and off and just drill holes and stuff where they control that electric drill. That's really important because when they control it, they may be better able to tolerate it. The other problem I'm seeing is if you wear headphones all the time, it's going to make sound sensitivity worse. So what you want to do is have them with you all the time. That gives you control. Have them with you all the time. And I need to find soft clothing that doesn't itch. That's really, really important because if I have itchy things against my skin, I just can't stand it. Let's go to the next slide. And sometimes, I don't know how that got in there sideways, but it did. Kids that have visual processing problems often hate escalators. They can't tell how to get on and off. Another thing is they might complain about print jiggling on the page when they read. And their eye exam may be more or less normal. The next slide shows some other problems that can sometimes happen, especially in nonverbal individuals, is the images kind of breaking up. This would be similar to kind of the things that people experience when they have migraines. We can go to the next slide. That simply shows the print jiggling on the page. And this is a subgroup of dyslexia. Not all dyslexia, but it's a subgroup that has this problem. And I'm going to give you some ideas on how to fix it. Let's go to the next slide. One of the things you might want to try is try printing the homework on light pale colored papers. This is my book, Calling All Minds. It's kids' projects. Now you see how we've got a light blue on the back of that? That would be the kind of pale colors you'd try. Light blue, light lavender, light tan. Try all the pale colors. Then another big problem is LED lights that flicker. This can be a really big problem. And some LEDs flicker and other LEDs do not flicker. And when you're building new classrooms, please, let's not have LED lights in them that flicker. This is a real serious problem. So if you got windows, get over by the window. If you can't get over by the window, you might get a small battery operated LED that does not flicker. Test it with your phone and put it on the desk. Wear a hat also can help with some of the overhead lights. Let's go to the next slide. Now, some individuals have very big sensory issues, and it takes extreme effort to screen out background noise. I have problems hearing in noisy restaurants. I have problems with fast chit-chat conversation. I simply cannot follow it. It goes by so fast. Some individuals need to have sensory breaks. Let's go to the next slide. This is the title of a paper, Environmental Enrichment and Effective Treatment for Autism. Now, it's an add-on to other types of treatment. And you stimulate two senses at the same time. Like you might hold a cold water glass and then smell peppermint. So you're always switching the two things. And environmental enrichment is an effective treatment for autism. That's the title of the paper. You can find it online. And you're always changing the two things you stimulate. And I think what it does is I think it helps to desensitize. Let's go to the next slide. Now, these are books written by people who do not speak, who type completely independently. I'd strongly recommend these books for anybody who's working with individuals that don't speak. And a lot of behavior in individuals that don't speak is caused by not having a way to communicate. These individuals communicate by typing, but you have to have some way to communicate. It could be sign language, it could be a picture board, it could be a talking device, but they've got to have a way to communicate. Because when you have a behavior problem with somebody that's nonverbal, the big number one cause is they can't communicate. Other causes would be sensory overload. So they're in a really noisy place, like a busy store. That could be sensory overload. Or it could be a hidden, painful medical problem they cannot tell you about. Their stomach hurts, they cannot tell you about it. And then maybe some acid reflux medicine would help. And these books here, they are all available online on Amazon, and they're written by people that type completely independently. Let's go to the next slide. Now, big problem you have in the autistic brain is slow processor speed. I can't follow rapid conversation, rapid multitasking, responding to a question fast. So when you're working with the little kids, give them time to respond. They're like a phone with poor service. Remembering long strings of verbal instructions. There are a lot of jobs that would be saved by using the pilot's checklist. In fact, there was a sad case where an electrician apprenticeship job was lost because the boss went yak, 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 and then the individual installed the wrong switches and the wrong light fixtures. And I have problems with interrupting conversations. And it happens because I can't get the timing right. I know it's rude, but I cannot help it. The next slide just talks about problems with attention shifting slowness. Yeah, hard for me to shift back and forth. And the next slide is some of Ami Klin's work, where they put eye tracking software on people who hadn't watched Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. Very, very social movie. And look at how much the normal person looked back and forth between the eyes. Tension shifting slowness. Yeah, that really, really, really shows it. Now, the next slide just gives you some tips on working with little kids. Slow down when you talk. And the grown-ups talked fast and went to gibberish. Always encourage the child to use their words. Give them time to respond. Another 1950s parenting method I really liked was teachable moments. So let's say we're playing a game and I go out of turn. Mother would say, you have to wait for your sister to take her turn. Or we're at the table and I reach across the table for the serving dish. She'd give the instruction, ask your sister to pass it. Now, it's important to teach turn taking because they got to learn how to wait. They've got to learn how to inhibit a response. That is really, really, really important. Let's go to the next slide. This just shows trashed out working memory. The next slide talks about fear being the main emotion in autism. Something got a little corrupted right there with a small print. But fear, and I had horrible fear, and I was terrified of airplanes and public speaking. So what I learned in public speaking was to have really good slides, and what I had to do with airplanes is I had to make them interesting. The next slide shows the plane I hated the most, because when that thing put the gear down, I was sure the bottom of the plane was going to fall out. So to make it you're less afraid of it, you get interested in it. Make the thing you're afraid of interesting. So the next slide shows a plane that I had a chance to sit in the cockpit, and it was hauling Holstein heifers to Puerto Rico. That made aviation interesting. Take this scary thing and make it interesting. The next slide talks about my fear center is larger. Now, I've been on antidepressant medication for 40 years. As I went through my 20s, the anxiety worsened with more and more and more colitis attacks. Everything I ate just went right through me. And that's why I was eating yogurt and Jell-O in the movie. And then when I went on a low dose of antidepressants when I was in my 30s, the colitis cleared up. And in my old book, Thinking in Pictures, my earlier book, Thinking in Pictures, I have a whole discussion of using antidepressant medication. Here's Thinking in Pictures, my original autobiography. And even though it's old, it's still true. The drugs haven't changed much. And the big mistake that's made with antidepressants is too high a dose. Basically, what you need is a starter dose or less. Parent after parents told me, well, he did just great on a low dose. We doubled the dose, had insomnia, couldn't sleep. It was just terrible. Low doses. What's in that book, even though it's 27 years old, it's still accurate. I've been keeping up on the medications. And there's way too many meds given out to little kids like candy. Way, way, way too many. Let's go to the next slide. That's my squeezing machine. And I was one of the kids where deep pressure was calming. I built that all myself, so that shows off some of my skilled trades. And what this also did is got me desensitized to being touched because I controlled it. See, this is where this whole thing of control is really important. The next slide shows some less expensive ways to do deep pressure. And some individuals really, really respond well to this. The next slide shows the optical illusion room that I got really interested in. We need to be showing kids interesting stuff to get them interested in interesting stuff. And I got fascinated with optical illusion rooms. And my science teacher goes, you got to figure out how to make it yourself. He gave me a few hints. Kids are not figuring out how to do stuff themselves and make some mistakes. When I was a child, I tinkered for hours. This book has got my parachute and little bird kite experiments in it. Tinker for hours and hours trying to figure out how to get stuff to work. Let's go to the next slide. This is Penrose tiling that Stephen Hawking used in his research. And you know what Stephen Hawking had to say about disability? And he told that to the New York Times right before he died. He said, concentrate on those things. Your disability does not prevent you from doing well. He could do math in his head super well. Next slide shows an issue of Science magazine. And then in the Europe, you have Nature magazine. These are two top science magazines. Well, you need to put these magazines in the library. Oh, they're my fun breakfast reading. Next slide shows mathematics in patterns. Next slide shows mathematical patterns in plants. And the last slide shows some places where you can get some really good free educational materials. There's all kinds of good stuff you can get online. And I think now it will be a time to do the questions.
Thank you, Temple.
Yeah. Okay, so the first question, what advice do you have for those high school or college students who can handle the intellectual part of the coursework, but not the planning ahead or the hands-on part?
Well, one of the things I do is I use a calendar where I can see the whole month. I have an old-fashioned calendar, you know, print your calendar. And I like seeing that whole month, because if I have to do a flight, let's say from Denver to New York with a 2-hour time zone change, that will take an entire day. If I take a 10 o'clock flight, because I have over an hour trip to get to the airport, unless I want to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning, that flight gets in around 3:30, get to the hotel by 5, that's an entire day. You see, and when I look at that calendar where I see the whole month, that helps me. I just use something that's called print a calendar, and you can just print them out. The other thing on working skills, this is where I'd like to learn some working skills before they graduate from high school. You see, a lot of parents will push the academics, and then they get mad at the school when the school wants to teach life skills. But where I'm seeing a real serious problem is maybe someone who graduated college with high honors, and they end up in their bedroom because they can't handle the workplace. It is a different kind of skill. And I just mentioned in my talk, I'd like to start with simple things like walking the neighbor's dog when you're 11 years old, where it's somebody else's dog. Somebody else is the boss. Or a teenager could help out in a little local store. You know, I just see it, things we could do. We have these things out in our rural areas, they're called dollar stores. And they have one manager that's like overworked, and the store's a mess. They're little small shops. Well, you could send a teenager over there and help the manager clean it up, like for an hour after school. And they could walk to it. You see, I just see that. Then maybe in another country, I see lots of little shops, and I'm looking at those shops and thinking, well, that little flower shop would be perfect place for a teenager to do a job after school, and they can walk to it. You see, I just see that. I'm like looking for places for jobs. And the problem is I see too many parents get so locked into the diagnosis, they don't think their kid can work. The other thing that's a big problem is now you're going all the way from Einstein on the autism spectrum to somebody who can't dress themselves. And see, the verbal thinker tends to overgeneralize and gets locked into the label. No, I think it's a big problem. And where I'm being a visual thinker, I'm going, well, that little shop would be perfect. Because what I don't want is a chaotic McDonald's takeout window as the first job. That's setting up for failure. That's setting up for failure. That's not going to work. But what one McDonald's did was they had the autistic lady running the cash register. And when the store got super busy, they put her on cleaning tables. That was just a nice little accommodation they just made in that store. We've got to figure out these simple things that we can do.
Right, right. No, that's excellent. Now, how can I help my autistic child who does well with reading, but has a lot of trouble with math skills, including telling time?
All right, I'm going to assume telling time is a problem. This is elementary school child. And the thing that helped me was a big old-fashioned school clock where the second hand would go around, and then every 60 seconds I could see the hour hand do one click. The minute hand do one click. And then every time that second hand went round, the minute hand would do another click. And you can still get those clocks. And you see, then I understood the passage of time. Another thing would be an egg timer, an old-fashioned hourglass, where it takes a certain amount of time for the sand to go through the hourglass. I think, and I know in the US you can still buy these clocks, they're battery operated, and you can see the minute hand move on it. That would help, because when I told time, I'd say, well, the big hand is on the 12 and the little hand is on the 3. When I first started learning how to tell time. And I think that might be something you could try for the telling time. Now, on math, let's make math real. For teaching fractions, we cut up a pizza. Well, you cut it up into fourths, or you cut it up into fifths. That's part of something. You can start just teaching with things like that for the very, very basic math. For algebra with me, it was just useless because there was nothing I could visualize. See, I can visualize a pizza. Also, I know how to size hydraulic cylinders. Well, pi times the radius squared by the amount of pressure that's in the hydraulic system. Yep, but you see, I see the equipment. You see, that formula is related back to something I can see. Okay, trigonometry, suspension bridges. And the suspension design has got trig functions. I see the bridge, both the fancy modern ones and the old-fashioned, the suspension bridge. But math, where it's just in the abstract, I have difficulty with. So I'm assuming, since you asked about time, this kid was probably not a teenager, probably like third grade. That's about when I was trying to learn how to tell time really well.
Right, right. Okay, no, that's an excellent, and we do have those clocks that people can buy. So that's an excellent way to handle that.
Because I used to watch the second hand go round. When the
Right.
second hand got to the 12, then the big hand would go click. You see,
Yeah.
and then I could watch it go around 5 times, and that's 5 minutes. See, that really helped me with the passage of time.
Right. You could see it and hear
I
it.
could see it. And then Mother just
Right.
explained that the little hand moves so slowly you can't see it. But the minute hand, every 60 seconds would go click, then 60 seconds later, click, and I could see it.
Right, right. Okay, our last question. My verbal autistic child loves to play on their iPad or on my phone. Is there anything wrong with this? Won't it teach them more about technology?
Well, I think a certain amount of using an iPad is fine. All day is not fine. You know, this is where we need to limit it. I would never say ban it, but you need to limit it. You know, just idle play on a computer where you're playing video games or you're looking at different videos and stuff. Just for fun, how about an hour a day? I can remember when the first TVs came in our neighborhood, and we were limited to 1 hour a day during the week and 2 hours a day on the weekend. So they have some time that they can do it. But what I don't want to see is a teenager spending 10 hours a day playing a video game, because then they're not doing anything else. See, they're not doing it in moderation. And there is research that shows that the autistic adult is more likely to get addicted to video games in a problematic way than the so-called normal adult. And then what you need to be doing, if there's too much electronics that's being used, you have to replace it with something else. And with the young adults, there's 5 or 6 individual cases where they gradually replaced it with auto mechanics, and it was very successful. And 2 of the young adults told me that the automobile engines were more interesting than the video games. And they ended up, one guy ended up fixing trains and loving it. The railroad loved him too. And we need these visual thinkers to fix stuff like trains. And so, the problem I'm seeing with a lot of video game playing, they're not going into video game design. But the other problem I'm worried about is artificial intelligence is going to just take over a lot of animation jobs. There's a lot of low-level animation jobs. Like you look at the credit for an animated movie, there's like 100 names on there. Well, they're doing things like making the fur on an animal look more realistic. Those kind of jobs they're gonna be taken over. So this is one of the reasons why I'm putting a lot of emphasis, especially for my kind of thinker, on the hands-on jobs, because they will not disappear. I don't think robots are going to go out and fix elevators anytime soon, and they're going to be mechanical devices for the foreseeable future, unless we get anti-grav. And I keep up on science. We're not even close to having anti-grav, because that's the only way you can make an elevator non-mechanical. See, I just see that.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Temple. We appreciate you sharing your knowledge with our parents. I know everyone will benefit from everything that
I
you've
want to
talked
answer
about
one
today.
question
Sure.
that didn't get asked, but I get asked it all the time. How do you
Sure.
figure out what kind of mind your kid is? Well, you probably won't see it in a 3-year-old, but by the time the kids get around 6 or 7, what do they gravitate towards? I didn't gravitate to the little flute that I had. I couldn't figure out how to play it. Another kid's going to pick it up and play it. I loved art. So, and I loved making things out of cardboard. And those things were encouraged. And so I'm a big believer in exposing kids to lots of different stuff. And if you have a child that's really good at math, if you just make them do baby math, they'll turn into a behavior problem. That's a kid who needs the algebra book. See, this is where people are different. Where for me, it's like pounding on a wall and teaching me algebra. But lots of things be available, encourage it. And but a child can't learn higher math if they're not exposed to it. And they're going to just get bored doing the baby stuff. Also, I'm seeing a lot of kids where they're doing a great job building things with Legos. They're not graduating to tools. I was using tools in 2nd grade, and I was using them safely. Plier, hammer, and screwdriver to make these cross-arm things for my parachutes to make them open more easily. They've got to be exposed to show the things that they can be good at. Just like Michelangelo, he was exposed to the art and he grew up with stone cutting tools. Mm-hmm. And then later on, mentoring, apprenticed into a studio. Mm-hmm. So get them out doing lots of different things to kind of, see what they like, see what they hate. I tell college students, go every opportunity to help scientists with their research, to get involved with internships that are career relevant, because even in college, you need to find out, well, for example, microbiology. So one student's going to love working in a lab. I'll tell you right now, I'd get bored working in a lab, doing same tests over and over again. But another student's going to love it. But you don't know until you try it.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
That's been very, very valuable, especially for me, both personally, and I hope our parents out there will enjoy that your talk, Temple. So thank you so much for participating.
One of the things I've tried to do is give people a lot of practical information they can just go out and use.
No, it's been amazing. I personally enjoyed it as well because my son's autistic. So.
And how old is your son?
7, but nobody gets him at school.
And what's he good at? He should start showing some things he's good at.
He's into science. He wants to be a scientist, a surgeon. So, I got a call from the school the other day to say they're very concerned because he knows all the body parts. He literally knows every single body part and how it works and the mechanics of it. even stuff that I don't know. And he doesn't know
Well,
how
then he needs to be moved ahead in biology then.
and he's not doing well at school because he's bored. He wants to
He's bored. You see, that's the problem. He's bored. And you take a smart kid and bore him, I'll guarantee you're going to have a behavior problem.
Oh no,
And-
he's completely dysregulated every day since September, and they don't know what to do.
Well, I can tell you what to do with him. This is where you get a laptop with maybe high school biology on it. And he can do that in the class. And I would turn his desk around. So if I was the teacher, just to make sure the biology program is up on the laptop, or the math program, whatever it is. I don't suggest putting him in high school. I don't suggest that. You can bring the high school class in an online version and have him do that in class, because he will be a behavior problem if this is not done.
Well, thank
Because
you.
I run into this problem all the time. All the time I've run into this thing, higher level math online. You know, and I would turn his desk around. So I'm the teacher. I want to make sure the math program or whatever, the biology program, whatever it is, that's on and not a video game or some other thing.
Yeah.
And that he's advancing in the program. And then I also would keep in touch with because the third grade teacher might not be able to grade that work, and keep in touch with the high school teacher that's on the other, that's on the other end of that online math class. And you see, I just see it. I actually see my old third grade classroom. I've now put a laptop in my third grade classroom. I mean, computers didn't exist in my generation when I was a child. But I'm seeing a laptop there, and it's turned around, and the chair's turned around so Mrs. Dietz can make sure the program's up and not something else. And then have a phone consult once a week with the teacher to see how he's doing in the high school math class. And bureaucracy is the only reason for not doing this.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
this
I
kind of stuff
know
find
that. I've been
very, very, very frustrating, and it really annoys me what you've told me. To put him in a class where he's doing
no, they've
less.
taken him out. No, they've taken him out the class. He's by himself in the corridor.
Well, why don't they give him a laptop with high-level classwork on it?
Well, I don't. Yeah, I'm not sure they want to do that. That's the
Why
thing.
would they not want to do that?
I mean, yeah, it's something that I'm fighting against, because I feel that he deserves,
Well, maybe what you need to do is find a really good online class and bring in a laptop, and he's going to do that in the corridor. And then you keep in touch with the teacher to make sure he's doing it. Find somebody. So it's biology. How is he in math?
He's good at maths. He's good at building things. He just loves building things and connecting things. And he won't necessarily follow a straightforward design or with instructions. He'll just build his own. He uses, we give him the tools, because Dad's kind of in trade as well. So we give him the tools. He safely uses them, and he just builds stuff. And
well, that he can do at home, but if he's going to be put out in the corridor, he needs to be put out in the corridor with a higher level online math class or online biology class, and just do it online in the corridor.
Yeah. No, I'm fighting for him. So, he's so smart.
Well, the other thing that's a problem is some people think that every kid should be the same.
Yeah.
One size doesn't fit all.
No.
That's the thing that's really a big problem.
Absolutely.
Because this just makes me sick when I hear this.
So no, your presentation for me has been amazing, because it's kind of really, I think it's given me hope.
I think they're going to put him out in the hallway. He needs to be taking a higher level class on that computer is what he needs to be doing, and give him a decent desk to put the computer on, so it's not on his lap.
Yeah. No, thank you. I'll take away that your tips and advice for sure.
And this Uber driver told me he had to really fight to get his son to be able to take a higher level math class on a computer in a primary school classroom.
I mean, they've also kind of pre-diagnosed him with PDA. Which is not.
What's PDA?
Pathological avoidance disorder.
Oh, that's garbage.
I mean,
It's
that's
just
that's what the
garbage.
school have come back with. But it's just when he becomes dysregulated if he's bored and he's not learning.
Well, he's bored and he needs to be given harder work. I think this is a real serious problem. This need, I don't know how long the time slot is for my talk, but some of the stuff we're doing now after my formal talk needs to be a fourth question. Because this is really bad.
Amazing. Well, I'll even bring the laptop in.
That's just so you'll even
Just wanna
provide
be
the
having
laptop.
fun.
You'll even provide the laptop.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay,
no,
well, I need to get going,
I'd
but
be
it's been
happy
good.
to.
Maybe you go. I'm going to take off and leave the meeting now.
Thank
but
you very
so
much,
for doing it.
Temple. It has
Thank
been
you.
awesome. Thank you so much.
All right,
Have a
great.
good rest of the week. Take care.
I will.
Thank
Okay, great.
you.
Yep,
Bye.
bye.
Bye-bye.